The scream pierced through the cheerful birthday music like a blade through silk. "He's got a bomb." The woman's voice cracked with manufactured terror as she pointed at 12-year-old Marcus Thompson, who sat quietly in his wheelchair, clutching a wrapped gift and staring in bewilderment at the sudden chaos erupting around him. The arcade games fell silent. The laughter died. Even the mechanical horse stopped mid-gallop. Karen Millfield stood frozen for a split second, her manicured finger still extended toward the boy, before the full weight of what she had unleashed crashed down upon Westfield Shopping Center like a tidal wave of human panic. The first person to run was a teenage girl near the pretzel stand, then her boyfriend, then the family behind them. Within seconds, the food court transformed into a churning sea of terror. "Call 911! Someone call 911!" Karen shrieked, her voice rising above the stampede of feet. She grabbed her phone with trembling hands, her perfectly styled blonde hair whipping around her face as she dialed. The operator's voice was calm, professional. "911, what's your emergency?" "There's a bomb!" Karen gasped into the phone. "A disabled boy. He's got a bomb in his backpack, Westfield Mall. Food court. Please send everyone." Her words tumbled out in a rush, each syllable adding fuel to the fire of chaos, already consuming the shopping center. Marcus remained in his wheelchair, his dark eyes wide with confusion as people streamed past him, like water around a stone. His mother, Diana Thompson, had stepped away moments earlier to get napkins from the counter. She turned at the sound of screaming to find her son at the center of a human hurricane. His birthday party guests scattered to the winds. Marcus. Diana fought against the tide of fleeing shoppers, her voice lost in the cacophony of screams and pounding footsteps. A man in a business suit knocked into her shoulder, spinning her around. When she regained her balance, she saw her son's face crumple with fear. The first police cruiser arrived 4 minutes later, its sirens adding to the symphony of chaos. Officer Janet Rodriguez stepped out to find the main entrance clogged with people pushing and shoving in their desperation to escape. An elderly man had fallen near the doors. A mother carried her crying toddler, while searching frantically for her older child. "I need backup. Immediate backup." Rodriguez spoke into her radio. "Possible bomb threat at Westfield Mall. Multiple civilians down. Mass evacuation in progress." Inside the food court, Karen maintained her position like a lighthouse of accusation, her arm still pointed toward Marcus, even as security guards approached the boy with weapons drawn. "That's him," she called out to anyone who would listen. "I saw him fumbling with something in his backpack. He looked suspicious." Marcus's birthday had started so differently just 2 hours earlier. Diana had spent weeks planning the perfect celebration at his favorite restaurant in the mall. His friends from the special needs program at school had gathered around the table, singing off-key and laughing at Marcus's attempts to blow out the candles from his wheelchair. The joy on his face had been radiant, infectious. Now that same face was streaked with tears as armed officers surrounded him. "I didn't do anything," he whispered, his words barely audible above the chaos. His speech was slow, careful, the way it always was when he felt overwhelmed. "I just wanted cake." Diana finally broke through the crowd and threw herself between the officers and her son. "He's autistic," she shouted. "He doesn't understand what's happening. Please, you're scaring him." Her hands shook as she reached for Marcus, but an officer grabbed her arm. "Ma'am, step back. We need to secure the area." "Secure what area? It's my son's birthday party." Diana's voice cracked with desperation. "Look at him. Does he look like a terrorist to you?" But protocol was protocol. The bomb squad had been called. The SWAT team was en route. Karen's 911 call had triggered a response that couldn't be simply turned off like a light switch. Even as it became increasingly clear that something was fundamentally wrong with the situation, Karen watched from behind a pillar near the orange Julia stand, her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke to a local news reporter who had somehow gotten her number. "I'm telling you, it was terrifying," she said, her voice breathy with excitement. This disturbed child, just sitting there with this bulging backpack, acting all suspicious and weird. I had to do something. I couldn't just let innocent people get hurt. The lie rolled off her tongue with practiced ease, each embellishment more elaborate than the last. She described Marcus as agitated and making threatening gestures, painting a picture that bore no resemblance to the quiet boy who had been peacefully eating birthday cake just minutes before her outburst. The truth was much simpler and far more ugly. Karen had been having the worst day of her increasingly difficult life. Her credit card had been declined at Victoria's Secret. The barista at Starbucks had gotten her order wrong. And then, as she was leaving the mall through the food court, she had to navigate around Marcus's birthday party. "Excuse me," she had said sharply to Diana, who was momentarily blocking the path with a chair. "Some of us are trying to get through here." Diana had apologized immediately, moving the chair and even offering Karen a smile. But it wasn't enough. Nothing was ever enough for Karen anymore. The world owed her something, and she was tired of being disappointed. "Maybe teach your kids some manners," Karen had snapped. "Not everyone wants to deal with that." The words had hung in the air like poison gas. Diana's face had changed, hardening with a mother's protective fury. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Some children shouldn't be in public spaces." It was Marcus himself who had diffused the situation, tugging gently on his mother's sleeve and saying, "It's okay, Mom. She's probably just having a bad day." His kindness had been genuine, innocent, the kind of pure empathy that made Karen's cruelty even more stark by comparison. But instead of shame, Karen had felt anger. How dare this child make her look bad? How dare his mother defend him? How dare they exist in her space, disrupting her already ruined day? So, she had walked away, gotten 50 feet toward the exit, and then turned around with the most destructive idea of her adult life. If they wanted to make her the villain, she would give them a real villain. She would show them what happened when you crossed Karen Millfield. The bomb squad arrived in their heavy protective gear, looking like spacesuits in the fluorescent mall lighting. They approached Marcus's rainbow-colored backpack, as if it contained nuclear material rather than birthday presents, and his communication tablet. The boy himself had been moved to a nearby chair, still crying and asking for his mother in broken, frightened sentences. "Please," Diana begged Officer Rodriguez. "Let me stay with him. He needs me. He doesn't understand what's happening." Rodriguez looked at the boy, then at his mother, then at the bomb disposal expert, who was carefully examining the backpack with electronic equipment. The expert looked up and shook his head almost immediately. "There's nothing here," he announced. "Art supplies, a tablet computer, some candy. This is a child's school bag." The announcement should have been the end of it. But by then, the damage had spread far beyond the mall. Local news crews had arrived, filming the evacuation and interviewing traumatized shoppers. Social media was exploding with videos and speculation. The hashtag #Westfield bombing was trending on Twitter. Karen found herself in front of a news camera, her story growing more dramatic with each telling. "He was muttering to himself," she told Channel 7 News. "Foreign words. I think he might have been praying or something. And the way he was clutching that backpack, I've never been so scared in my life." Each lie built upon the last, creating a narrative that painted Marcus not as a vulnerable child celebrating his birthday, but as a dangerous threat that only her quick thinking had neutralized. She basked in the attention, the sense of importance, the way reporters hung on her every word. Meanwhile, Diana sat with Marcus in the mall security office, watching her son rock back and forth in his wheelchair while trying to process what had happened to his special day. His birthday cake sat abandoned on the food court table, its candles melted into colorful wax puddles. "Why did the lady say those things about me?" Marcus asked, his voice small and confused. "I didn't do anything bad, did I?" Diana's heart shattered a little more with each word. "No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes." But Marcus was too smart, too perceptive not to understand that this was something more than a mistake. He had seen the hate in Karen's eyes during their brief encounter, had felt the weight of her disdain even before she had made her devastating accusation. The local news that evening led with the story of the foiled bomb plot at Westfield Mall. Karen's interview was featured prominently, her words treated as gospel truth, despite the complete lack of evidence to support her claims. The story painted her as a hero, a vigilant citizen who had potentially saved dozens of lives. Marcus wasn't named due to his age, but his description was specific enough that anyone who knew him would recognize the story. Disabled, autistic, dark hair, wheelchair. In a community the size of theirs, anonymity was impossible. The calls started that night, first to the school, demanding that Marcus be removed from the special needs program, then to Diana's workplace, suggesting that she was an unfit mother raising a dangerous child. By morning, someone had spray-painted "terrorist" on their front door. "We need to do something," Diana told her sister Carol over the phone the next day. "This is destroying his life. My life. I can't send him to school. I can't take him anywhere without people staring." Carol was quiet for a long moment. "What about the security cameras? The mall has to have footage of what really happened." It was such an obvious solution that Diana wondered why she hadn't thought of it immediately. Grief and stress had clouded her thinking. But Carol was right. The mall's security system would have recorded everything. Diana's first call to Westfield Mall's management was politely deflected. Her second was ignored entirely. By the third call, she was speaking to their legal department, who informed her that security footage was only released in response to court orders or law enforcement requests. "But this could clear my son's name," Diana pleaded. "This could show everyone what really happened." "I understand your frustration, Mrs. Thompson, but we have policies in place to protect our customers' privacy." Privacy. The word was laughable when her son's face was being broadcast across social media as a potential terrorist. Diana hung up and immediately called the one person she knew who might be able to help her brother-in-law Tom, who worked as an investigative journalist for the city paper. Tom Chen had been following the story with growing skepticism from the beginning. Something about Karen's account didn't add up. Her descriptions of Marcus's behavior kept changing with each interview. Her timeline was inconsistent. And most importantly, no one else at the scene could corroborate her version of events. "I'll look into it," Tom promised Diana. "But I need you to understand that this might get worse before it gets better. Once we start digging, we're going to uncover some uncomfortable truths about how quickly people can turn on a child." Tom's investigation began with the other birthday party guests. The children were too young and traumatized to provide coherent accounts. But several parents had been present during the initial confrontation between Karen and Diana. Their stories painted a very different picture than the one Karen had presented to the media. "She was incredibly rude," said Jennifer Martinez, whose daughter Sophia was one of Marcus's closest friends. "She basically said that Marcus shouldn't be allowed in public. Diana was just trying to apologize and move a chair." Another parent, David Kim, remembered Karen's parting words. She said something about teaching the kid manners. It was completely uncalled for. Marcus hadn't even been looking in her direction. But the most damning testimony came from Sarah Hendricks, a mall employee who had been on break and witnessed the entire interaction. "The lady was clearly just looking for a fight," Sarah told Tom. "She could have walked around the party easily, but she chose to make an issue of it. And then, when the mom stood up for her kid, she got this look on her face like she wanted revenge." Tom compiled these witness statements and submitted a formal request for the security footage through the newspaper's legal department. The mall's corporate office initially resisted, but the threat of a public records lawsuit eventually forced their cooperation. The footage was damning in its clarity. The mall's security cameras had captured everything: Karen's initial confrontation with Diana, her cruel comments about Marcus, the boy's gentle attempt to defuse the situation, and, most importantly, the moment when Karen walked away, stopped, turned around, and made the decision that would destroy so many lives. The video showed Marcus sitting peacefully at his party, never touching his backpack in any suspicious manner, never displaying any of the threatening behavior Karen had described. He was simply a child, enjoying his birthday, surrounded by friends and family who loved him. But the footage also revealed something else: the calculating look on Karen's face as she pulled out her phone to make the 911 call. This wasn't a panicked response to a perceived threat. This was deliberate, malicious, and premeditated. Tom's article ran on the front page of the city paper 3 weeks after the incident, accompanied by still images from the security footage and detailed witness testimony. The headline read, "Security footage reveals false bomb threat against disabled child was act of revenge." The community's response was swift and overwhelming. Within hours of the article's publication, the Shaka Justice for Marcus hashtag was trending locally. Parents who had initially called for the boy's removal from school now called to apologize. The principal issued a statement supporting Marcus and his family. But it was Karen's response that truly revealed the depth of her character. Confronted with video evidence of her lies, she didn't apologize or show remorse. Instead, she doubled down, claiming the footage had been edited and that she was the real victim of a conspiracy to silence her. "They're trying to destroy me because I spoke the truth," she told anyone who would listen. "That family has connections. They're making me look bad to protect their dangerous child." The delusion was breathtaking in its completeness. Even faced with incontrovertible evidence of her own cruelty, Karen managed to cast herself as the wronged party. It was a psychological phenomenon that Tom had seen before in his journalism career, but never quite so starkly displayed. The district attorney's office announced charges against Karen within a week of the article's publication. False reporting of an emergency was a felony that carried serious consequences, especially when it resulted in the kind of public harm Karen's lies had caused. The trial became a media sensation, drawing attention from national news outlets and legal experts. Karen hired an expensive defense attorney who argued that she had acted in good faith based on her genuine perception of a threat. The defense painted her as a concerned citizen whose only crime was being too vigilant in a dangerous world. But the prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Maria Santos, systematically dismantled Karen's credibility. The security footage played in court was devastating, showing clearly that Karen's descriptions of Marcus's behavior were completely fabricated. The witness testimony painted a picture of a woman motivated by spite rather than safety concerns. This wasn't a mistake. Santos told the jury during closing arguments. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate act of cruelty directed at a vulnerable child because his mother dared to stand up to the defendant's bullying behavior. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all charges. Karen's sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following month, but her legal troubles were far from over. The city was also pursuing civil charges related to the cost of the emergency response, and several victims of the Stampede were filing personal injury lawsuits. Perhaps most significantly, the mall consortium announced that Karen was permanently banned from all of their properties nationwide. Her photograph would be distributed to security personnel at over 200 shopping centers across the country. The community response extended far beyond legal consequences. A crowdfunding campaign for Marcus's family raised over $50,000 to help cover their legal expenses and therapy costs. Local businesses offered donations and support. The mayor issued a proclamation declaring Marcus an honorary citizen and apologizing on behalf of the city for what he had endured. But for Marcus himself, the healing process was more complex than any official recognition could address. The trauma of that day had shaken his fundamental trust in the world around him. He began experiencing anxiety attacks when they went to public places. His sleep was filled with nightmares about police and sirens and people running away from him. Diana found the best child psychologist in the state, Dr. Rebecca Walsh, who specialized in helping children process trauma. The sessions were slow and sometimes heartbreaking, as Marcus struggled to understand how someone could hate him so much without even knowing him. "I keep thinking about what I did wrong," Marcus told Dr. Walsh during one of their sessions. "If I had been different, maybe she wouldn't have been so mad." Dr. Walsh's response was gentle but firm. "Marcus, what happened to you wasn't about anything you did. Some people carry anger inside them, and sometimes they let that anger hurt innocent people. That's about them, not about you." The healing wasn't just individual, it was communal. The incident had forced the entire community to confront some uncomfortable truths about how quickly they had been willing to believe the worst about a vulnerable child. It sparked conversations about prejudice, about the treatment of people with disabilities, about the responsibility that comes with having a voice in the community. The special needs program at Marcus's school received increased funding and support. New policies were implemented to protect students from harassment and discrimination. Most importantly, the community began to see Marcus not as a victim or a symbol, but as a young person with his own hopes, dreams, and remarkable resilience. 6 months after the incident, Marcus asked if he could have another birthday party. Diana's first instinct was protective. Why risk another public gathering? But Dr. Walsh encouraged them to reclaim the spaces and experiences that Karen's actions had tried to steal from them. The second birthday party was held at the same mall, in the same food court where the nightmare had begun. But this time, the community came out in force to support Marcus and his family. Friends from school, neighbors, local business owners, even some of the police officers who had responded to the original call attended the celebration. Officer Rodriguez, who had been one of the first responders that terrible day, presented Marcus with a certificate making him an honorary junior officer. "I want you to know," she told him, "that what happened to you made all of us better at our jobs. You taught us to look more carefully, to ask more questions, and to remember that behind every call is a real person with real feelings." The party was covered by local media, but this time the story was one of healing and community resilience rather than fear and division. Marcus blew out his candles with a smile that had been missing for months, surrounded by people who had chosen to see him as he truly was, a bright, kind, beloved child, deserving of celebration. Karen, meanwhile, faced the consequences of her choices. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison, with the possibility of early release contingent on community service and anger management counseling. Her civil penalties eventually exceeded $100,000 when all was said and done. But perhaps more significantly, she had lost something that couldn't be measured in dollars or jail time: the ability to see herself as the victim in her own story. In prison, Karen was required to participate in therapy sessions designed to help her understand the impact of her actions. It was a slow, painful process of confronting the prejudices and resentments that had led to that moment in the mall when she chose cruelty over kindness. The breakthrough came during a session 6 months into her sentence, when her therapist asked her to imagine how Marcus had felt during the stampede she had caused. For the first time, Karen began to cry, not for herself, but for the child whose birthday she had destroyed with her lies. "I was so angry," she whispered, "at everything, at everyone. And he was just there, and he was happy, and I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand that he could be happy when I was so miserable." It wasn't absolution, but it was recognition. And recognition was the first step toward the long road of making amends for the harm she had caused. Marcus's story became a catalyst for change throughout the region. Schools implemented new anti-bullying programs specifically designed to protect students with disabilities. Law enforcement agencies revised their protocols for responding to reported threats involving minors. Most importantly, the community learned to question initial narratives and seek truth rather than rushing to judgment. A year later, Marcus testified before the state legislature in support of a bill that would increase penalties for false emergency reports targeting individuals with disabilities. His words were simple but powerful. "I just want other kids like me to know that they're safe, that they're valued, and that when bad things happen, good people will stand up for what's right." The bill passed unanimously and was signed into law with Marcus and his family present in the governor's office. The legislation became known informally as Marcus's Law, ensuring that his ordeal would help protect others from similar attacks. As the second anniversary of the incident approached, Diana reflected on how much their lives had changed. The trauma would always be part of their story, but it no longer defined them. Marcus had not only recovered, but had found his voice as an advocate for others. He spoke at schools, community centers, and conferences about the importance of inclusion and understanding. The mall had installed a small plaque near the food court, not to commemorate the terrible day, but to celebrate the community's response to it. The inscription read, "In recognition of our commitment to treating all members of our community with dignity, respect, and love." Marcus visited the plaque sometimes when they shopped at the mall. He would touch the bronze lettering and remember not the fear and chaos of that first birthday party, but the warmth and support of the second one. He had learned that while some people might choose hate, many more would choose love when given the chance. The final chapter of Karen's story was written 2 years after her release from prison. She had completed her community service requirements by working with organizations that supported people with disabilities, learning firsthand about the lives she had never bothered to understand. She had written letters of apology, not just to Marcus and his family, but to everyone who had been harmed by the panic she had created. Most of those letters went unanswered, and Karen accepted that many people would never forgive her. But Diana had surprised everyone, including herself, by agreeing to meet with Karen as part of a restorative justice program. The meeting took place in a neutral space with a mediator present. Karen looked older, smaller somehow, as if the weight of her actions had physically diminished her. When she saw Diana, she began to cry before saying a word. "I destroyed your son's childhood," were her first words. "I don't know how to live with that." Diana studied the woman who had caused her family so much pain. She saw someone broken by her own hatred, someone who had lost years of her life to anger and prejudice. And surprisingly, she felt pity rather than rage. "You didn't destroy his childhood," Diana replied quietly. "You gave him a different one than I planned. But Marcus is stronger now. He's wiser. He's learned that he can survive terrible things and still choose to be kind. In some ways, you gave him a gift, though I'm sure that wasn't your intention." The conversation lasted 2 hours and ended with no dramatic reconciliation or forgiveness. But it ended with understanding. Karen understanding the magnitude of her actions, and Diana understanding that hatred consumed the hater more than the hated. Marcus, now 15 and preparing for high school, had heard about the meeting but chose not to attend. He had forgiven Karen long ago, not because she deserved it, but because holding on to anger would have meant letting her continue to hurt him. He had learned that forgiveness was a gift he gave himself, not a gift he gave his enemies. On his 15th birthday, Marcus chose to celebrate at the mall food court once again. It had become a tradition, a way of reclaiming the space that had once been the site of his greatest trauma. This year, he invited not just friends and family, but also some of the people who had stood up for him during the darkest days: Tom Chen, Officer Rodriguez, Dr. Walsh, and dozens of community members who had shown him that courage and kindness were more powerful than fear and hate. As he blew out his candles, Marcus made the same wish he had made for the past 3 years, that other kids who felt different or vulnerable would know that they were not alone, that their communities would protect them, and that even in the darkest moments, there were always people willing to stand up for what was right. The wish seemed to be coming true. Letters arrived regularly from other families who had faced similar challenges, thanking Marcus for his advocacy and sharing their own stories of resilience. Schools across the country were implementing programs based on the lessons learned from his experience. And most importantly, Marcus himself had discovered that his greatest strength was not overcoming what had happened to him, but using what had happened to help others. Standing in the food court, where his childhood innocence had been shattered and then rebuilt stronger than before, Marcus looked around at the faces of the people who had become his extended family through shared struggle and triumph. The scared 12-year-old boy who had cried in his wheelchair as police surrounded him was gone, replaced by a confident young man who understood that the world could be cruel, but that it was also full of people willing to fight for justice and compassion. The story that had begun with a lie had become a truth that resonated far beyond one mall, one community, one family. It had become a testament to the power of standing up for the vulnerable, of seeking truth over convenience, and of choosing love over fear, even when fear seemed safer. As the party wound down and the cleanup began, Marcus helped fold chairs and clear tables like any other teenager at any other birthday party. But those who knew his story watched him with quiet admiration, understanding that they were witnessing something remarkable, a young person who had faced the worst of human nature and responded by bringing out the best in everyone around him. The future stretched ahead, full of possibilities that Karen's moment of cruelty had tried to steal, but ultimately could not touch. Marcus would graduate, go to college, build a career, maybe start a family of his own someday. He would face new challenges and celebrate new victories, but he would do it all with the knowledge that he had survived something terrible and made the world a little bit better because of it. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Not that justice had been served or that Karen had been punished, but that a community had chosen to see a vulnerable child as deserving of protection and celebration. They had chosen to believe in truth over lies, love over hate, and hope over fear. They had chosen, in that moment and in all the moments that followed, to be the kind of people who made the world safe for children like Marcus to dream, to celebrate, and to simply exist without fear. The lights in the food court dimmed as the mall prepared to close, but the warmth of the day lingered. Marcus would sleep well that night, surrounded by love and secure in the knowledge that no matter what challenges tomorrow might bring, he would not face them alone. His community had his back. His family stood beside him, and his own strength, tested by fire and proven unbreakable, would carry him forward into whatever adventures awaited. The breaking point had become a beginning. The end of innocence had become the start of wisdom. And the boy, who had once been seen as a threat, had become a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt different, vulnerable, or alone. It was, perhaps, the best possible ending to a story that had begun with such darkness. Not because the darkness was forgotten, but because the light that followed had made it impossible for such darkness to ever triumph again.